Speaker. No one else seems to be bothered. Mr. Speaker, if there wasn't anything more to describe Nick Smith and as a Minister of Housing, his policy, we've seen two emblems of that today. The first of those was that he is now the $1 million minister. Yep. That's Nick Smith's lasting legacy to the people of New Zealand, that the average house price in Auckland is $1 million. And Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear what that'll get you in Auckland. $1 million in Auckland today will get you a 2-bedroomed brick and tile in Mount Roskill. A 2-bedroom brick and tile in Mount Roskill is the $1 million dream of this minister. Mr. Speaker, that is a disgraceful legacy to New Zealand, to see housing go so far out of the reach of hard-working New Zealanders. The primary school teachers, the firefighters in Auckland who can't afford to live there anymore. This is a city with a housing market out of control, and for 8 years, all we have had from the national government is denial. A denial that there is a problem, an excuse, a person to blame, an organisation to blame, anyone other than this national government stepping up and taking responsibility. And so today, Nick Smith can say, I'm the silver medal winner for New Zealand, the second most overvalued property compared to rents, and the second most overvalued properties compared to incomes in the OECD. That's where we've reached under Nick Smith. A housing market that means for most New Zealanders, young New Zealanders, the Kiwi dream of owning their own home, being part of a community, providing security and stability for their families is slipping away. And the national government come to the House today with the second of the emblems of Nick Smith's time. Yet another piecemeal, tinkering, small measure that the government brings forward and then says you've got to do this under urgency. It is an emblem of the catalogue of incompetence, the chaotic and damaging housing policy of Nick Smith to bring this bill to this House under urgency. And I want to state right now, Mr. Speaker, that the government should accept an SOP from Phil Twyford to split these bills in two. To split up the bill, part one of the bill, that says that these special housing areas provisions need to be extended because, and I'll return to this in a minute, Mr. Speaker, there is at least a small amount of value in that proposal, albeit very small. But part two of the bill actually has nothing to do with part one of the bill and shouldn't even be together at this point, but it should go to a select committee. What's the urgency, Dr. Smith? What's the urgency for part two of the bill? Getting houses built, he said, you've had 8 years and you haven't shown any urgency. Why today on a provision that is significant? It is significant because it takes away the rights of certain New Zealanders. It could be justified. We need a debate about that. There's no way that a piece of legislation like this, as important as this, should be blithely brought through under urgency. And Mr. Speaker, I went looking for the regulatory impact statement on that matter, on part two of the bill, and found nothing on the table of the House. But we do have the departmental disclosure statement on the bill as a whole. And Mr. Speaker, it makes for disturbing reading, because part two of this bill changes the process in terms of the right of return, the right of offer. Yes, it does. Why are you putting it up, Dr. Smith, if it doesn't change the process? Why is it in the House? Why are we all here? If you're not doing anything, why is it in the law? Doesn't know, doesn't have an answer, hasn't got a clue about what he's doing. And what's worse, Mr. Speaker, is in the departmental disclosure statement, the government is required to answer a series of questions. All departmental disclosure statements have to answer these questions. Part 4, significant legislative features, compulsory acquisition of private property. Does this bill contain any provisions that could result in the compulsory acquisition of private property? Answer, no. That's what the minister and his department are telling his officials. He says no. Isn't that precisely, Dr. Smith, what you're trying to achieve with the bill? Is to say to people who may have had a right of offer back that they no longer do. Well, if you don't like that one, we'll go further down the page on the departmental disclosure statement. Significant decision-making powers. Does this bill create or amend a decision-making power to make a determination about a person's rights, obligations or interests protected or recognised by law, or that could have a significant impact on those rights, obligations or interests? Answer from the minister, no. He says no. That is categorically untrue, Minister. You've misled your Cabinet colleagues. That's precisely what this provision in Part 2 does. And if it doesn't, why is it here? Why have you put it in the law?
Read it.
Read it. I've read it, Dr. Smith. And what it does under Part 2 is it changes the way in which some people may believe that the Public Works Act applies to them in this law. Now, Dr. Smith, this is the problem, because what should be happening at the end of this debate is that this piece of legislation should be going off to the Select Committee. Maybe, just maybe, we can accept that Part 1 of the bill can't do that. Because despite being warned by Phil Goff in May that there were going to be problems with the special housing areas and the unitary plan, Dr. Smith's waited until the 6th of September to come to us with an urgent law because the whole provisions around special housing areas expire on the 15th of September. So maybe Part 1 passes the urgency threshold. Part 2 does not pass the urgency threshold. So Dr. Smith, here's your chance. Split the bills in two. Part 1 comes through. Many parties in this House will be able to support that. Part 2 goes to a Select Committee and the public actually get to have some submissions on a fundamentally important change in law around whether or not there are offer-back provisions under the Public Works Act. The Public Works Act, and everyone in this House will have had some interaction with it during their time as a politician or beforehand, has a hierarchy in it. Has a process for the return of land or the offer back of land to the original owners. If that's changing, which presumably is the only reason you would put something in a law, because if it's already the law, you don't need to change it, that deserves proper scrutiny. That's a major change. That's about people's property rights, which Dr. Smith claims today aren't affected by this clause. They quite clearly are, Dr. Smith. You've misled your Cabinet colleagues, and it's time to actually have a proper debate about this bill. Mr. Speaker, the special housing areas promised so much from Dr. Smith. They promised that they were going to be the panacea for Auckland in particular's housing crisis, and yet we have seen such little action from them, around 1,300 actual houses, at a time or during a period of time when National's been in office where the deficit in housing has gone up by over 40,000 houses. 163,000 extra people have arrived in Auckland during that time, and the government has failed to keep up. In 2015, we're going to see, around 9,600 houses built. That's still well below the 13,000 houses that are required. If you look at it on a population basis, we're getting around 6.3 consents for every 1,000 people, yet we need it to be up around 13 or 14, which is what happened when the Labor government under Norman Kirk took this seriously, and it is exactly what happened, took this seriously the last time when Norman Kirk was the Prime Minister in the 1970s. Mr. Speaker, what we needed, and if we were to be here under urgency, it would be to have a comprehensive housing plan, to build affordable homes, to crack down on speculators, to actually build more state houses, not as this government does, to avoid doing that because they are, in the words of the Dominion Post today, fundamentally averse to building state houses. They've got their ideological blinkers on, Mr. Speaker, and that's bad enough. But if you add that to pushing through under urgency a fundamental change to the Public Works Act and how it applies. It is a disgrace to use urgency this way from a failed and hopeless government.
Speaker.
Maureen Pugh.